Hello and welcome. This is Jim Karp with Rehmann, and welcome to the Rehmann podcast. Today we're going to be talking with Ken Zimmer about business continuity planning and the importance of what you can do now as well as in the future. Hello and welcome. This is Jim Karp with Rehmann. I'm here with Ken Zimmer. Ken, can you introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Ken Zimmer. I'm the VP of Business Development for Rehmann Technology Solutions, and I've been with the combined firm about 20 years.
Okay, so Ken, we got a situation now where a lot of the operations for organizations have been disrupted. They're not processing as they normally do. And so a big topic a lot of people are talking about today is business continuity as well as disaster recovery. What are your thoughts on the topic?
Well, first of all, business continuity and disaster recovery are two very separate items, albeit they go very much hand in hand. But the business continuity side of this actually is very much a topic of discussion right now, as you said, with the pandemic that we have going on. We've been receiving lots of calls from clients over the past couple of weeks to figure out how to get remote workforce out and figure out how to allow people to access important documentation and important things within the network. A lot of these companies hadn't planned for this previously, and now we're in a situation where they've got 45 remote users that they need to figure out how to connect in, and how do we do that from a laptop perspective? How do we do that to make sure that we're secure and we have VPNs and everything along those lines? So that's where a business continuity plan really hits home at this time. If you think about it from a client perspective, the clients that have a business continuity plan probably were more prepared for this situation than those that are not. And it comes down to it was very much a scramble for a lot of clients that are out there today.
Okay, so, a lot of times people differentiate between continuity plans and disaster recovery plan. How would you differentiate between them?
Business continuity plan, if I break it down as simply put, is having a plan together to make sure that your business is able to continue normal activity or as close to normal as possible and conduct business on a daily basis. The disaster recovery plan or disaster really comes in, hey, my building is burned down or something along those lines. How do I now get my company back to a state that we're able to function, whether that be setting up remote offices, setting up remote users, being able to do more production and those type of things. So essentially the business continuity is making sure I have what I have today and my users can continue doing business, albeit maybe a little less productive than normal, but I can still conduct business. Whereas disaster is, hey, I've got a potential smoking crater or my building's burned down. How do we get ourselves in a position to get back up and running in a timely fashion?
Yeah, and I've also heard a lot of people talk about put it in simple terms, is continuity planning is how do you sustain your operations? Disaster recovery is how do you support those? So it's kind of like under the hood for a car. We just step on the gas and we go. So that's our business operations. And then the disaster recovery is everything that happens under the hood in order to make sure that the operations can be sustained.
Spot on.
Okay, so given that as the context of everything out there, what recommendations would you make for our clients in the situation that they're in today, as well as long-term for the future?
Obviously, the initial phase is to get yourself to a functional level as best you possibly can, regardless of what you had prior to today. Like I said, there's a lot of clients out there that are figuring out ways to get remote users into their environment, working from home and such. Keeping in mind, as you do that, now you've opened up the potential for some security. So making sure as you're going through this and you're having remote users connect in, are they secure? What devices are they using? Are those devices locked down and have the antivirus or different programs there to make sure that they're not going to be as open to malware or viruses that could potentially spread to my environment? Am I connecting over a VPN or a virtual private network to make sure that things are encrypted? There's a lot of those type of things that people start to look at. You may look at somebody that says, oh, it's easy just to set up an RDP session to the outside world. That's the easiest way that my users can understand and connect up. Well, that is true, but the flip side of that is very insecure. We see a lot of the stuff that comes down from a security perspective and breaches come through in sessions like that. So that's where we want to make sure we're kind of running through this as we go in many cases, and we want to make sure that as we get things out there, we're in a hurry to get remote workers up and running and be able to be functional. But we need to make sure as we're doing this that we're taking the time to make the check marks of all the security steps that should be taken to not create a larger issue for your company down the road.
Okay, now those are all good points. And just as an FYI too, Mark Spock and I talked the other day about a lot of the security issues, and he covered some of those as well as others. So if there's an interest, we have a podcast that's out there basically saying, how do you make sure that your remote workforce is safe and secure? So we know in the short run, these are some things that we need to do. How about the big picture? What's the long-term vision, and how do you get the continuity plan up and running?
Well, the big picture, obviously, there's a lot of clients that are seeing this right now, and they're saying, wow, we really wish that we would have had something better documented prior to this happening. So now what we do is, as we go through a business continuity plan, let's say down the road, obviously, we look at what our biggest potential risks are. You have to identify what those risks are. Probably a year ago, pandemic didn't even pop up on many people's radars. It may have been a fire. It may have been a tornado or something along those lines. But now, obviously, this whole issue has probably turned pandemic into one of those things that we really need to look at as a serious potential. So you look at what your highest risks are and what those potential risks are. And then you kind of put the plan together based on what those risks are to be able to react to those risks. So the business continuity plan is simply putting a plan together, looking at what those risks are, taking those risks and establishing what I consider to be my critical success factors for my organization. What do I need to do to make sure my critical people can get in, and whatever we deem as we need to have as business critical to move forward at that point. So in our situation, we had this in place. So from the Rehmann Technology Solutions side, it was basically, we just kind of business as normal. I mean, people are not working in the office, we're working remote, but we're still doing everything that we always have. And one of the things that our clients have said to us is, man, we haven't seen any difference on the way that we've done things. We do have critical people, and we've identified staff members that are going to be in the office at certain times on certain days. So it comes down to the continuity of that and making sure that you establish all those little things that make the difference for your company to be able to just kind of keep business as close to normal as you possibly can.
Okay, so kind of summarizing what I'm hearing you say is it's risk-based. You need to understand the threats and the risks that you have out there. And then based on the critical business processes that you feel that you need to sustain, you build the plan out along those lines. And a good example is you're talking about Rehmann Technology Services, as well as the Rehmann as an entire entity as well. Overnight, we flipped 900 people from the office out into the remote work site. And we haven't missed a beat being able to do that, and we still have the teams up and functioning. So that's all a byproduct of a lot of planning that went on in advance. Now, a lot of times people talk about the business impact analysis. Do you have thoughts and comments on that?
Well, ultimately, again, it kind of comes back to what the biggest potential issues can be, and establishing a set of tools, or establishing what those are and figuring out what we need to have up and running in those times. There may be different things that you establish. Hey, if we have this happen, then obviously our building's not available. We can't do production out in the warehouse, let's say, but we need to be able to still communicate with our clients. So there may be different things that are done for different type of impacts to the business. Some of the things that when we go through some of these topics, I actually will do a little session with the client base to talk about recovery time objective and recovery point objective.
Okay.
And essentially, this is a nice exercise that if the client base has not done it, I always suggest doing this. And it's a simple exercise, and we talk about recovery point objective and recovery time objective. Simply put, those two acronyms, RPO and RTO, can define what my business does and how my business deals with backup, disaster recovery, and business continuity. It takes us down to the point where it tells me how much data I can lose and is acceptable, and how much time it takes me to get it back up and running in the event of some sort of issue.
Okay,
So,
if I can jump in here real quick,
sure.
RPO, which is the recovery point objective, that's the amount of data.
Yep.
You determine how much data you can afford to lose. And then
Yep.
RTO, the recovery time objective, is how long should we have to wait before we can get the data back up and running? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, carry on.
Now that will establishing those on every simple application. You don't have to dive into every every individual down to the last level, but you take your most important applications and you say, okay, well, if I'm without email or ERP or something along those lines, how much data in those can my business lose? And how much time can they be down? So we start to identify those, and we have our C-level group lay that out as a whole, and it basically helps us take the disaster recovery planning, the business continuity planning, and it backs us into our solution set. So we know what those look like, because we know in many cases that a company can't function without their ERP, or they can't function without their email, because that's become a very much a mission critical application in today's business. So ultimately it's looking at those, establishing that, and it's a very simple process, but it's a process that gets overlooked so much of the time because everybody treats every application the same. And I always use the analogy of, do you treat a $100 bill the same as you treat a $1 bill? Do you treat your ERP, the $100 bill, the same as you do some office files that may be a $1 bill? In many cases, they do that, but that's where we want to establish that, to come up with a plan around how do you treat those applications and how do we back into these other plans, whether it's disaster recovery or business continuity, to be the most effective approach for my business.
Okay, so it sounds like you have to have an integrated approach, and it's not like everything is isolated or an island unto itself. I'm hearing you say continuity, disaster, you have the backups, you have to make sure that you manage the security along those lines as well. What about some parting thoughts for us, insights going forward, next steps people can take to make sure that they can sustain their operations while we're working through this COVID crisis?
Well, essentially, it's obviously stay safe. Second is just to make sure that, again, you are putting your business in the best possible situation to be successful. Make sure you are taking care of those end users that are connecting, and make sure that you're doing it in a secure fashion. And then ultimately, as part of this business continuity and disaster recovery conversation, is the piece that people start to look at down the road is, okay, we go through something and we flip our whole remote workforce, or our whole workforce, to a remote workforce. Now everything gets back to normal. Is there anything that needs to be done to bring that back in to get back to our normal business? So these are all things as you think about, because sometimes changes are made. Sometimes changes are made on firewalls to accept different users or different things along those lines. So when I transition back into my normal everyday business, which we hope is very soon, is how do I make that transition and make sure that anything that I've done on the outside before, now that those doors are locked and the windows are locked as well, to make sure that I don't have any things from a security perspective moving forward. And that's when we want to look at other things out there from a security, whether it's penetration testing and some of these other things. As I'm making changes, make sure that we have everything from the outside perspective and the inside locked down. So now as we go through this, that we don't put ourselves in a crisis situation by leaving things left open from when we were working through this situation.
Gotcha. Okay. So Ken, if people have questions or comments, what's the best way to reach out to you?
You can call my direct line, 616-957-9803, or cell phone, 616-437-7022. Email ken.zimmer@rehmann.com.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the insights today. And, from a customer perspective, we appreciate you helping us figure out from a continuity perspective what can be done now in the short run, as well as what can be done in the long run. Have a good day, Ken.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep, take care.